A good coordinator hire can propel your Big Ten football program to the next level, but which teams that hired new coordinators during this offseason did it best? And are the Nebraska Cornhuskers actually flying under the radar in 2025? Let's talk about it.
From LA to Piscataway, all Big Ten all year long. This is Big Ten 10.
You know, we're getting to that dead period in the offseason, and we're going to get into this a little bit more really after spring practice and into the summer, where some people might start ranking head coaches. We all love those power rankings lists. This guy is ahead of that guy for this reason, and that guy's ahead of this guy for another reason as well. But I think an underrated part to what maybe we think of head coaches are the staffs that they really build around them. A lot of times a play caller, a coordinator on offense or defense can really elevate a team. And if you hire a bad coordinator, it can maybe stagnate your team certainly as well. I picked out 4 of the best coordinator hires in the Big Ten that really stood out to me. Now, this doesn't mean that I think that these are the 4 best coordinators in the Big Ten. I think when you consider the situation that these teams are in and considering the skill set that these coordinators bring, I think these guys are going to make an impact. I think these guys are going to improve these situations and these teams over time. Let's dive into my top 4, and you cannot talk about the best coordinator hires, not only in the Big Ten, but in all of college football, without talking about Jim Knowles leaving Ohio State to be the new defensive coordinator over at Penn State. He's going to be, the highest paid guy in the country. And regardless of new, old, present, in between, he's one of the best coordinators overall, certainly in all of college football. And I've said this before, but Jim Knowles getting hired at Penn State is just one of the many things we've seen this offseason of the Nittany Lions pushing all of their chips into the middle of the 2025 national championship push table, certainly. And I think it's saying something. It is saying something when you can look at when you lose Tom Allen, who is a really good defensive coordinator, who goes over down to Clemson down there in South Carolina. When you can bring in a new defensive coordinator with what Tom Allen did last season, and you can say that this is an upgrade. It's an upgrade because Jim Knowles is as good as it gets from a coordinator position. Jim Knowles' job in year number 1. Now, I will say this about year 1 in 2025 compared to year 1 at Ohio State in 2022. He's working with more. They kind of had to do a little bit of surgery. They had to figure things out. They had to get a lot better, I think, on defense when he showed up in Columbus, Ohio. And look what he was able to do certainly over there. Obviously did a really good job at Oklahoma State certainly as well before he came over to the other OSU in Ohio State. But getting the most out of this defense in year 1, okay, there's maybe going to be a little bit new terminology. You're going to have different guys in different places, things like that. Figuring out what Jim wants to do and translating it to that personnel. Getting as high elite level of defense in year 1 is going to be a huge factor to determine if Penn State is going to get to that national championship level. If they can have an elite level defense, and they got really good players certainly coming back, but if they can have that elite level defense in year 1, this is going to be a team that is going to be in the national championship conversation in year number 1 with Jim Knowles running this defense. Okay, so I think that's maybe the most high-profile coordinator hire, but maybe my favorite and most impactful coordinator hire is former Indiana co-offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach Tino Sunseri becoming the new offensive coordinator in Westwood for the UCLA Bruins. You know, you talk about Curt Cignetti, you talk about Mike Shanahan as the play caller of that offense. Tino Sunseri was also, he was on the staff obviously at Indiana, but he was also on the staffs with both of those guys at James Madison. He was the quarterbacks coach there. He was the quarterbacks coach at Indiana. Of course, we saw what Curtis Rourke was able to do. A group of 5 transfer coming up to the Big Ten and having the success that he did from the quarterback position. At UCLA this year, you're going to have a group of 5 quarterback that had a lot of success in the Sun Belt in Joey Aguilar that's transferring up to UCLA. It's the same type of situation. Now we'll see if Tino Sunseri can get the most out of that position, overlooking the entire offense, and as the play caller, certainly over there in Westwood. I think that this hire has the potential to be the most impactful and create the most improvement out of all of these coordinator hires, certainly within the Big Ten. He was the quarterback coach at James Madison from 2021 to 2023. Cole Johnson at JMU set single-season records in 2021. We know what Jordan McLeod was able to do as well in 2023. I mentioned Joey Aguilar. He's got his buddy Caden Robinson transferring with him, and I think a big reason I mentioned his past and what he's been around and what he's been able to develop within offenses at the quarterback position. But I think another big part is the personnel that UCLA is going to have on offense, specifically in the passing game. I mentioned Joey Aguilar. I mentioned Caden Robinson, the chemistry that those guys are going to have coming over from Boone, North Carolina. But then you look at some of these other wide receivers. You look at the Rico Flores of the world. You look at the Quasi Gilmers of the world. All of a sudden now, it's coming together where this is a passing offense next season with Tino Sunseri leading the show, calling the plays, and the personnel and the players that they have that I think are pretty good. This is a passing game, I think, that could give teams around the Big Ten fits. We go to the O-line, we go to the D-line, we go to the defense. Maybe a little bit of a different story for Deshaun Foster's Bruins. They got a lot of work to do, but this is one part of the team. If everything really clicks together under Tino Sunseri's leadership, this is a group that I think could make a big improvement. And that's what it's all about from the coordinator spot. Let's stay on the West Coast, but let's go to the other side of the football. Former Purdue head coach Ryan Walters and former Illinois defensive coordinator Ryan Walters is becoming the new defensive coordinator with the Washington Huskies. Look, I know it didn't go well at Purdue. It was bad. It was really, really bad at Purdue. I think what we saw in West Lafayette, Indiana, proved that a young coach in Ryan Walters is just not ready, I think, to be a head coach at this point in time. But I'll say this about him coming into Washington. He's not going to fail. He's not going to fail. This defense is not going to look like a Purdue defense. That's just not going to happen. We've seen him in these defensive coordinator roles at previous institutions. I talked about Illinois, what he was able to do in a very short period of time. Illinois was a bad defensive football team in the triple digits, and he turned them into one of college football's best defenses in just a couple of years. I think at Missouri he had like a top 20 and a top 30 defense there as well when he was the DC over with the Tigers in the SEC. I think this hire has the potential to be really, really good, but I think it's really going to meet somewhere in the middle to where it was at Illinois, being at that type of top level. They got a lot of NFL players when he was coordinating that defense in 2022. But I think it's, like I said before, it's certainly not going to fall flat like it was at Purdue. I think considering what Washington, how they play, and the talent that they hope to continue to have on offense, if you can get Ryan Walters to get this thing as a middle-of-the-road defense, I think you're happy with that, certainly, in Seattle, Washington. You rewind back to Purdue. I think one thing, there were a couple of things, and it might have only been a couple of things that he did well over there with the Boilermakers. Like, you look at some of the players that left Purdue out of the transfer portal this past year and are going out to other places, and these are good players. Now, obviously, it wasn't all 11 guys, but there are select good players that are transferring to high-level and high-money programs. Will Helt going to Clemson, Cole Brevard going to Texas, Dylan Thieneman going to Oregon certainly as well. Like, there were, in a vacuum, there were good players. It's just the whole unit certainly didn't come together, and it certainly didn't click as well. He excels in the secondary development, and secondary recruiting. Like, he was recruiting, like, Terrian Grant was a high 4-star, low 5-star, and he got him to commit to Purdue out of the state of Tennessee. You have someone like a Coy Beasley, who is a 4-star type of talent. Like, he got talented guys to commit and sign on the dotted line for Purdue. And if he can do that in West Lafayette, Indiana, you got to imagine he can maybe do that also in Seattle, Washington as well. So we talk about the secondary development and what he's been able to do over the course of his career. You got to be excited, I think, if you're a Washington fan, at this corner duo and seeing how Ryan Walters can develop these guys, not only this year, but certainly over time. You look at Ephesians Prysock is going to be on one side. Takario Davis, former Arizona Wildcat, the number 1 corner in the transfer portal, was coming over. Of course, there were a lot of losses. This was a Washington defense that allowed the least amount of passing yards in the Big Ten last season. A lot of losses, but there are those two guys that certainly are maybe going to be the cornerstones of this passing defense. We'll see just how good Ryan Walters can have that pass defense unit coming up next season. But I think the Huskies are going to like having Ryan Walters as their defensive coordinator. Let's move on to the last one, the last of the big ones, certainly, that I'm going to be talking about today. Back on the offensive side, and it's about the University of Michigan. Chip Lindsey, former North Carolina offensive coordinator, is set to be the offensive coordinator for the Wolverines. Folks, stop me if you've heard this before. A North Carolina offensive coordinator who, although his offenses put up good numbers in the run game, maybe he skews a little bit more towards his expertise in the pass game, going to a Big Ten team that over the course of history and over the course of time has maybe specialized in the physicality and the run game. I don't think this is going to be a Phil Longo going to Wisconsin type of situation, because that was really ripping up 25 to 30 years of DNA and doing something completely different. I think Michigan was a lot more diverse offensively throughout their history than the Wisconsin Badgers. So this isn't going to have the negative effects that it had in Madison, Wisconsin. Look, Michigan just had a first-round NFL draft pick in J.J. McCarthy. They've had better wide receivers on the perimeter over time than the Wisconsin Badgers have certainly had as well. The thing that I really like about this hire is you needed to be able to nail this hire, and you needed a guy that had a lot of experience over certain stops and had a lot of experience working with quarterbacks and getting the most out of some of these quarterbacks as well. Because you got a guy in 19 in maize and blue in Bryce Underwood. And Kirk Campbell wasn't going to cut it. And that's why they got rid of him. And that's why they wanted to bring somebody in that had a little bit more expertise in the passing game, because they knew Sharon Moore based on his experience when he was the offensive coordinator, when he refused to throw the ball against Penn State a couple of years back, and just his smash mentality, offensive line coach, right? He dials up and really puts together great run schemes. And then you wanted to bring somebody, I think that was a little bit better in terms of putting together really good passing schemes, so you could kind of combine them and make an ultimate diverse offense where Bryce Underwood is going to succeed at Michigan. And you look at Bryce Underwood's high school tape, and you look at the skill set that he brings to the table. He's running a lot of formations out of shotgun. He's running a lot of these spread type of schemes, which Michigan, in the Jim Harbaugh era, and you could really say historically, hasn't run. So I think you're going to mesh the Sharon Moore style with this style that also fits in with the spread type of concepts that fit Bryce Underwood's game as well. I really like the meshing of these two things coming together. Chip Lindsey averaged at least 30 points per game in 9 of his 12 seasons as a full-time college coach. There is a proven track record here with Chip Lindsey, and it's going to be very exciting to see what he can do with this offense in the run game and the pass game in 2025. When you're talking about new coordinators, I kind of want to pivot to a team that's going to be working with 2 new coordinators as compared to the start of the 2024 season, and that's the Nebraska Cornhuskers. man, does the vibe just feel different when we're talking about Nebraska now here in mid-February as compared to other mid-Februaries, a month out in change until spring practice really gets going in Lincoln, Nebraska. You know, usually when we get to this time of year, the season has concluded, the winter transfer portal period has really wrapped up. You're drinking the Rule-Aid. You're drinking that red Kool-Aid, right? This is going to be the year that the Nebraska Cornhuskers, they're going to win 8 games. They're going to win 9 games. You hear people nationally. They're going to be a top 20, top 25 football team. Maybe that if things really bounce their way, maybe they could be a college football playoff type of team. But you're hearing that about other Big Ten football teams. But from what we've heard over the past few years, that's not really showing up right now in Lincoln, Nebraska. It's a little bit of a different feeling right now surrounding the Cornhuskers. I think there's a couple of reasons, certainly, for that. Now, we got to go back to these spring game comments that Matt Rule certainly had, because they've already suffered a lot of transfer departures. We're going to get to that here in just a little bit. For those of you watching on YouTube, you can already see it certainly on their screen. Now, although I agree with what Matt Rule said and the reason why he's going to alter the spring game format, it gives off a little bit of a different sign than Matt Rule maybe had last year, right? Where he had a lot of guys sticking around the program. When other teams were sniffing around Nebraska, he was promoting his culture of why would anybody want to leave the Nebraska Cornhuskers? Now, I understand Tony White leaving to be the defensive coordinator at Florida State has something to go along with that, but there were more than just key defensive players that ended up transferring out of this Nebraska football program. And that really is a segue into my next thing. I think the transfer losses and just the exodus of players from this Nebraska football program has played a little bit of an impact. And I think there's not as much, maybe as much optimism as there have been in previous years, because of the amount of starters, because of the amount of impact players that were leaving this program. Outside of Purdue, of course, they had a 1-11 season and a head coaching change. Nebraska had the most transfer losses in the Big Ten. They lost 26 players. They brought in 16, so that's minus 10 in the portal period. Now, although there were some good transfer pickups, you look at Williams Nweri, you look at Dane Key, you look at Isaiah Hunter, you look at Dason McCullough. Like, there were some good additions, certainly through the transfer portal. I feel like they lost more than they gained, certainly in that respect, and I think that has been able to translate in maybe not as much optimism surrounding this Cornhuskers program right now. And not only did they lose a lot of players, they lost a lot of good players to good programs, right? Like, that can kind of tell the story. If you lose, maybe they were highly rated players coming out of high school and you lose them to G5 programs or other lower level programs, it just means like, hey, they weren't made to play at this level. But you look at James Williams going to Florida State. You look at Jamari Butler, a big part on that defensive line, going to LSU. Princewell Uman Mielen going to Ole Miss. There's a family connection there. Makai Bayer, who started at linebacker, going to the SEC at Missouri. Stephon Thompson to Florida State. Nate Borkircher going over to Texas A&M. Dante Dowdle at Kentucky. A lot of SEC schools, which I think really speaks to the trend that these other schools fought a lot of these players at Nebraska. Malachi Coleman going to Minnesota. Gabe Irvin Jr. going to K-State. Jalen Lloyd, that's a big one. I really love the speed and the deep threat that he really provided. He's going to Stillwater to play at Oklahoma State, certainly as well. I think these factors have contributed to maybe not just those in Lincoln and maybe not just the fans of Nebraska, but folks like myself and maybe folks that cover college football a little bit more broader, maybe looking past the Nebraska Cornhuskers this offseason. Maybe not drinking the Kool-Aid and maybe not drinking the Rule-Aid certainly as much. For me, I will be honest, for me, it's a little bit of Nebraska fatigue. I've looked at the rosters individually these past years. I looked at the roster this past year. I'm like, hey, that's a roster that can win 8 games. Year before that, I kind of thought the same thing. Even going back to the Scott Frost era, I thought that they had rosters to put it together to have winning seasons. And maybe I'm just not drinking the Kool-Aid. I'm not drinking the Rule-Aid. I'm looking over this Nebraska team because I'm a little bit tired of investing in this program and maybe not getting the return on the investment, certainly. But maybe, just maybe, being off the radar is the best thing that could happen to this Nebraska Cornhuskers football program. This time of year, there's a lot of people, and going into the spring, and maybe not having the full spring game where everybody is on display, that's not going to get as many people around the national media talking. And therefore, it's not going to translate in a lot of this Nebraska media hype. You look at last year's spring game when Dylan Raiola was slinging it all over the football field. That got a lot of people, including myself, very, 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 one more time for everybody in the back, very excited. But now maybe for multiple reasons, Matt Rule is keeping a lot of these things under wraps because maybe deep down inside, he wants this team to be looked over. He wants this team to be motivated. He wants this team to be underrated a little bit and not have all of this preseason hype, not have all of these expectations and anticipations to turn into that high level of football team, because in the Big Ten, it is tough to really break through. If you're not at that level, it is tough to really break through into that level. Nebraska as a program is in a spot where they're sitting kind of right in the middle of the Big Ten. And when we talk about the preseason story, or the spring storylines, I should say, and then they eventually work their way into preseason storylines, there's so many other things that people are talking about right now. You talk about the Penn State investing into a national championship and bringing everything back like Michigan and Ohio State before them. You look at Ohio State in what they're replacing this season, but they're still going to be in that playoff hunt. You look at the defending Big Ten champion, Oregon Ducks, and going with somebody like a Dante Moore and DeCorian Moore coming into that program, and them being a little bit maybe more dynamic, but still holding their spot as a college football playoff team. And then you have Michigan. Can they respond with Bryce Underwood? We saw it with Nebraska with Dylan Raiola last year. Bryce Underwood is going to be getting a lot of national attention over there. Can Indiana run it back one more season? Illinois has all of these experienced players coming back. We've got way too early preseason top 10s. We've got way too early preseason top 15s. Brett Bielema and the Fighting Illini are there. For the first time, really, at least maybe in my lifetime, in that program's history, at least in a while, Illinois has off-season, spring, preseason, big-time expectations over there as well. Now, all of a sudden, when you kind of cross these names off the list, now you're getting to the middle of the Big Ten Conference. Now you're getting into a spot where Nebraska might be flying under the... I know it's crazy because it's been completely the opposite over these last handful of years. But I think Nebraska is sitting in a situation where not a lot of people are going to be talking about them. Not a lot of people... I don't think a lot of people are going to have super high expectations for the Nebraska Cornhuskers. But that might be just how they want it. Those are my thoughts on these matters. I want to hear your thoughts. Coordinator hires, if I missed one. If you maybe see somebody that you think could crack into that top 3 or that top 4 of best coordinator hires, definitely leave that in the comments below. Also, make sure you comment on all things Nebraska. Do you think that they're flying under the radar a little bit? Or are you still drinking that Kool-Aid? Are you still drinking that Rule-Aid? Do you think that this is a Nebraska team that could maybe jump up and surprise some people? Leave all of that in the comments below. I'm Big Ten Ted. We will see you in the next one.
Thanks for watching Big Ten Ted, where it's all Big Ten all year long. Make sure to like the video to spread the word of Big Ten Ted to the masses, and subscribe to the channel for updates on Big Ten content that drops every day.